Here on Nature League, we explore the amazingness of life on Earth. One thing common to all life is an ongoing series of reactions inside of us called a metabolism. A related concept is aging and the process of getting older over time. Figuring out why life isn't immortal is fascinating, so we dedicated several videos to the theme of metabolism and aging. In our first video, we explored the definitions and connections between these two related topics. Life on Earth is incredible, and each week on Nature League we explore the amazingness of living things. But one of the reasons why living things are so fascinating is because they don't last forever. All life on Earth comes and goes, both on the species level and also on the level of individuals. But why do life forms appear just to eventually pass away? And how does that process happen? To get to the bottom of these questions, we need to look at two related concepts: metabolism and aging. Let's start with metabolism. In every organism, there are countless processes happening every second within cells. Some of these chemical processes create larger molecules, and some of them break molecules down. There are specific names for these processes. Anabolism, or anabolic pathways, are the process of building bonds and new molecules. I remember this by thinking of anabolic steroids and how those can make someone beef up. Another example is the formation of proteins, bigger molecules, from amino acids, which are much smaller. Basically, anabolic pathways use energy to turn smaller molecules into bigger ones. What about the reverse process? That's called catabolism. Catabolic pathways break larger molecules into smaller ones. In breaking bonds, energy is released. A great example of this that we all rely on is the breakdown of sugars into usable energy. Our cells are doing that all the time. And where does metabolism come into it? Well, metabolism is the sum of catabolic and anabolic processes. In other words, metabolism is the whole sum of making and breaking bonds in an organism. Generally, metabolism is a sort of summary of how matter and energy change and flow throughout the processes of life, which is kind of a big deal. What's cool about metabolic pathways is that they are really similar across different species. That said, how fast a metabolism runs can be very different across species. If you look at the metabolic rate of warm-blooded animals and adjust for mass, smaller animals typically have faster metabolisms. But it's really hard to compare across species. There are so many different requirements for life and energy in different organisms, and how do you even begin to scale for differences between, say, bacteria and plants? This is an ongoing battle of measurements and scaling, and scientists are still trying to figure out how to compare metabolic rates across life on Earth. However, one thing that seems pretty likely is that metabolism potentially plays a role in how fast a species ages. And that brings us to the process of aging. It's no surprise that scientists have long been interested in why humans get older and what affects that. And also, unsurprisingly, the leading theories have changed over time as well. One of the first theories put forth was called the rate of living hypothesis. The idea was that all living things had a certain fixed amount of energy, and if you spent that energy more quickly, you'd die more quickly. Evidence came from observations that large animals with slow metabolisms lived longer than small animals with fast metabolisms. This theory hung around for a while, but over time, some contradicting information came into the picture. For example, it turns out that birds actually have much faster metabolisms than mammals of the same size, and yet birds live longer. So another theory came along to offer an explanation of the connection between metabolism and aging. This one was called the oxidative stress or free radical hypothesis, and it goes like this. Aging happens because over time, cells are damaged by free radicals released as byproducts of metabolic processes. Specifically, these free radicals are destructive versions of oxygen atoms that come from oxidative metabolism, and the damage accumulates with age. But much like the rate of living hypothesis, the oxidative stress hypothesis of aging also runs into issues with conflicting new data sets and experiments. While some studies have shown that genetic and diet changes lead to increased lifespan and reduced oxidative damage, other studies have failed to demonstrate any effect of antioxidants on longevity. DNA, proteins, and other macromolecules are for sure affected by free radicals, and an interesting area of open research is testing how organisms with different lifespans have adapted ways of defense against this chemical damage. Keep in mind that metabolism can be affected by several things throughout an organism's lifespan, so even if a strong correlation between the variables we've discussed hasn't quite been validated, there are some other potential players in the aging game. Specifically, recent research into the genes that affect our biological clocks have come up with some fascinating results. In older individuals, the regulated daily cycles of bodily chemicals get thrown off and become less regular. Some studies are even suggesting that dysfunctional clock genes in younger humans actually contribute to disease states often found in older people. A recent paper published in 2013 considered a bunch of different species and aging processes in order to come up with 9 possible hallmarks of aging, specifically ones having to do with cell and molecular biology. One of these aging hallmarks is telomere attrition, and I find it one of the most fascinating age-related processes. Overall, organisms accumulate genetic damage over the course of a lifetime. However, one particular region of chromosomes, called the telomere, gets hit way harder than others. Telomere attrition, or the shortening of this specific chromosomal region, is common to normal aging processes across mammals. Alright, now a metabolism and aging lesson plan wouldn't be complete without a dash of immortality chat. After all, one of the most exciting applications of this topic is the search for longer life. So which species on Earth have come the closest? While we've discussed how hard it is to perfectly compare metabolic rates of different species, we can at least compare absolute maximum lifespans of individuals. Single individual trees have been reported with ages over 5,000 years old, and individual fungi have been estimated at older than 1,500 years old. If we look at the animal kingdom, the longest living species happen to be some of the simplest ones, at least in terms of evolutionary time. Sponges, our most distant animal relatives, can live for thousands of years. The ocean quahog, a species of clam, can live over 500 years. And you know I wouldn't pass up an opportunity to bring sharks into the mix. It just so happens that a Greenland shark specimen was reported just a few years ago to be several hundred years old and still living. What about animals more closely related to humans? The longest living vertebrates include giant tortoises and bowhead whales. These species have had individuals with estimated ages of over 200 years old. But for true immortality, we have to check in with a few amazing groups of life on Earth. First, the sponges. While some species are noted for living thousands of years, other species are seemingly ageless. Current thoughts on how are based around stem cells. Basically, certain sponges have stem cells that continuously proliferate. Another group of possible immortals are the cnidarians, a group that includes hydras and jellyfish. With hydras, an individual can reorganize its existing cells into a new body form if damaged. So instead of growing more, a rearrangement called morphollaxis can be used to keep on living. Perhaps one of the most famous immortals is the hydrozoan Turritopsis nutricula. This jellyfish can go back and forth between the adult and juvenile life stages, and could possibly continue this process forever. This is why this species has been named the immortal jellyfish in some news accounts. The relationships between metabolism and aging are complicated, and new research is constantly adding to the complexity of our ideas. What's for sure is that one reason life on Earth is so special is because it isn't forever, and the mysteries of immortality are still being figured out. Also, jellyfish are rad. We took a field trip to the University of Montana here in Missoula to chat with an expert on metabolism. Dr. Art Woods told me all about Antarctic sea spiders and why being gigantic helps them survive. I am really excited to be joined by Dr. Art Woods here at the University of Montana, and I'm going to let him tell you a little bit about what he does.
I'm a professor of biology. I have a sort of long and nerdy history of working on insects and insect physiology. I'm going to talk about some of the Antarctic work that I've done, and interested also in climate change and the effects of climate change on the ecology of invertebrates altogether, but what that really means is mostly insects, because that's the main thing that's on the Earth.
In wildlife biology and ecology, how would you define metabolism?
So metabolism is like the sum of all of the energy transformations that are going on inside your body. So it provides all the energy that lets us live.
What are some trends for life on Earth when it comes to metabolism or metabolic rate? Or are there none and there are just exceptions everywhere?
Bigger organisms almost always have bigger metabolic rates. Not always, but if you look at sort of statistically speaking, for sure, like a whale is going to have a way bigger metabolic rate than a donkey. And there's something called an aerobic scope that a lot of animals have. Well, all aerobic animals have this, but it's only been measured in some of them. And the idea is that you have some very low resting metabolic rate, and you also have some maximum amount of oxygen that you can burn through. And that provides a window, and the size of that window is sort of a measure of the capacity that you have to do work. And so different species have different size windows. Insects have the highest known aerobic scopes, so some of them that fly, like big moths and bumblebees and things like that, have an aerobic scope that's like 120, meaning that when they're flying, their metabolic rates are 120 times higher than they are when they're at rest.
What is the role of oxygen broadly in metabolism?
So you can think of the way we extract energy from our food is like an energy waterfall, right?
Yes.
So you have energy in the food that you eat, and what our body does is it releases that energy and it lets it fall down this waterfall inside our cells, and that releases energy, and we use that energy to make ATP. So we're charging up ATP, and it turns out that how much energy you get from your food depends mostly on what the level is at the bottom. Right? So you can get more energy if you can make the bottom of the waterfall go lower.
Sure,
right?
to have
because
more
the water's
steps
falling
to release
further.
more energy, yeah.
And it turns out that oxygen is like one of the lowest bottoms that you can use. And that's literally why we use oxygen for aerobic respiration, because you get so much more energy than you would if you use something else as the sort of bottom, what we call the electron acceptor at the very end of the process.
And we see that occasionally. Some other examples would be something like sulfur, so in an anaerobic situation, right? But in terms of the things that we know and familiar to us, things like mammals and, like you said, animals, oxygen's playing that game at the bottom, receiving those electrons at the end game. But invertebrates play the game a little differently. So how are invertebrates taking in oxygen?
Yeah, two things. So one is it gets back to why insects are so amazing and have such high aerobic scopes. What that really means is that they have a system in their body that can deliver oxygen at super high rates to their muscles that are using up that oxygen. And that system is called the tracheal system. Basically a bunch of tubes that are filled with air that branch and go throughout their body and basically go to every mitochondrion in every cell. And it's like an ultra high performance system because oxygen can move way faster in air than it can in water.
Right.
So that's basically why insects can have such incredibly high metabolic rates.
That's cool.
And fly, yeah.
And now a word. Not from our sponsors, but from the dictionary. Welcome to this month's Wild Word. Once a month on Nature League, we'll look at the etymology, or origin and history, of words related to nature. This month's theme is metabolism and aging, but instead of picking a word within that theme, why not break down the theme itself? This month's Wild Word is metabolism. During our metabolism and aging lesson plan, we discussed the definition of the word metabolism and how it broadly has to do with the whole sum of energetic reactions in an organism. The word metabolism can actually be traced back to ancient Greek, but it has two separate parts we should look at. The prefix meta has a lot of different meanings, some of which include between, higher, beyond, and by means of. In Greek, the prefix meta would also be used to denote a change, and this is most likely the original source definition. The second part of the word metabolism most likely comes from the Greek verb ballein, which means to throw. Metabolism in the biological sense is all about energy, and the ways that energy is either released by chemical reactions or is used to create larger molecules from smaller ones. Either way, the etymology of the word metabolism includes both the making and breaking of compounds conceptually. Energy is being thrown, in a way, between different forms. Not only that, but our metabolism is that which propels a living organism forward with life. So while a formal definition of metabolism is the chemical processes that occur within a living organism in order to maintain life, metabolism comes from a combination of word pieces that literally mean to throw a change. And that is pretty wild. I know that there's several projects in your lab, but in terms of temperature and metabolism, what kind of projects do you have going on?
Major thing we've done in the last few years is to work on sea spiders in the oceans, and worked on this particular pattern, which has been known for maybe 100 years, called polar gigantism. And what that means is that marine invertebrates that live near the poles tend to have much larger bodies than their relatives that live elsewhere in the world. And so we've been working on some sort of metabolic explanations of that. In cold water, things have low metabolic rates because they're cold. And that means that they're not using oxygen very, very fast. And at the same time, in polar waters, there's usually a lot of oxygen available. Some of the highest oxygen levels in the world are around Antarctica. And so you have this situation where there's a lot of supply and not very much demand. And we think that that allows
Really cheap prices.
Yeah, basically. Well, we think it allows things to evolve really thick tissues and really large body sizes, and they can still get enough oxygen into their tissues.
Oh, sure.
And so it kind of opens the window for body size, and they can push up to the top end of that window.
What kind of benefit is there to being larger in a region like Antarctica?
That idea that I just explained to you is really about the opportunity window, right? So what sizes can you be? And we're saying that the upper limit is bigger. But that doesn't say like why do lineages evolve into the upper end of that range? We think that there's probably one of two things. Either that the window is larger and so some lineages just by chance evolve into it. The other possibility is that there really is some selective advantage to being larger, and you can think of a lot of them. So the sea spiders, they walk on the bottom of the ocean, and the biggest ones actually walk quite a bit faster than the smaller ones. These really big ones are mostly scavengers. So they're walking around trying to find stuff that's like trapped on the bottom or is falling down dead, and they're gonna pull off little pieces of it. And you can imagine that being big and walking fast would give you a real advantage for finding that stuff faster than everybody else.
When we study how things have adapted to colder or warmer environments, that is going to matter when we think of the global change that is occurring. So if something is really well suited for this colder environment, and so well suited that it even has to do with oxygen and metabolism and these very fundamental things, what does that look like in the long term for the ability to evolve if those colder spaces are no longer cold? You mentioned that the colder waters have more oxygen. That seems really important. Yeah, so what does that look like in a changing world?
There's a couple things. So one is we found that the metabolic rates of the sea spiders are incredibly sensitive to temperature. So this was work done by Caitlin Shishido, who's a grad student at Hawaii. So she experimentally brought them into the lab and warmed up the water a little bit and measured how fast they used oxygen. And what happens is their metabolic rates skyrocket.
Oh, wow.
I mean, they're like way higher at even 2 or 3 degrees compared to minus 1.8 degrees Celsius, which is what the seawater temperature is. And so that implies that, potentially a lot of things. It implies that they may grow a lot faster, they may have to find a lot more food, they may have problems getting enough oxygen. And so, their bodies are burning up this oxygen, and then they're getting it in by this process of diffusion. And so I've developed a little mathematical model that sort of keeps track of those processes. And it predicts that as the water warms up, the oxygen levels inside the sea spiders are going to go down. And if they go down too far, that's going to be a problem because it's going to inhibit their ability to move around. They're going to feel like they're suffocating all the time. And we're worried that the biggest sea spiders are the ones that are going to feel this the most. The big things are going to suffer the most.
And if big things are being affected, big things eat big quantities of food and probably have a bigger impact if you're looking at total kind of spatial manipulation or even other effects within the food level. I feel like looking at these questions is such a cool way to touch on so many different pieces of life on Earth and how we're all making it work and finding a way and what that means.
Where better to learn about aging than in super long-lived species? We next explored this theme in a format called Denatured, where I broke down a popular peer-reviewed journal article about giant tortoises and their secrets of longevity. For this month's Denatured segment, we're going to look at an article released in December 2018 in the journal Nature, Ecology, and Evolution. In this month's lesson plan, we touched on the different processes that organisms undergo in terms of aging. At the end, we mentioned that this is an open area of research, and that we're learning new things all the time about how different species live to different ages. In this paper, entitled Giant Tortoise Genomes Provide Insights into Longevity and Age-Related Disease, the researchers investigated the topic of aging by studying the genes of giant tortoises. To do this, the researchers used a method called comparative genomic analysis. While a gene is just one particular stretch of DNA, an organism's genome is the entire set of DNA. So in comparative genomic analyses, all of an individual's DNA is compared with all of another individual's DNA to find similarities and differences. In medicine, comparative genomic analyses are used to investigate regions of interest that might have to do with something like having a disease versus being healthy. These methods have been used to find genes and pathways related to metabolism and aging in several long-lived mammals, including the naked mole rat and bowhead whale. Giant tortoises are some of the longest-lived vertebrates on Earth, so you'd think they'd be the main subject of a ton of aging research. However, until this paper, there had been relatively little genomic analyses done on giant tortoises. That's right, it was clearly turtle time. Except these are tortoises, not turtles, so
Tortoise time.
In their study, the researchers conducted a comparative genomic analysis between one PINTA island tortoise and one Aldabra giant tortoise. The PINTA island tortoise was a special individual known to many around the world as Lonesome George. He was the last remaining member of his species and passed away in 2012 at an estimated age of over 100 years old. In general, some giant tortoise species can live well into their 200s. In an early analysis, the team found protein families common to these two species, as well as Chinese softshell turtles and humans. By comparing the giant tortoises to these outside groups, the researchers could identify genomic differences mostly specific to giant tortoises. They point out three major processes that seem to have shaped the evolutionary trajectory of the giant tortoises we know today, and one of those processes was metabolism regulation. These protein family results were found during the preliminary analysis, and the team wanted to explore even further. Instead of just generally exploring the genomes, the team had a few specific hypotheses in mind that they wanted to test. More specific hypotheses meant more specific regions of the genome, so they also selected a few thousand genes of special interest. These genes were related to several different lines of questioning in the study. Of these, about 500 of the genes they specifically looked at had to do with the molecular control of aging and lifespan. And this checks out, because it just so happens that members of this research team were responsible for publishing 9 hallmarks of aging back in 2013, some of which we touched upon during our lesson plan. While the team found a ton of exciting results spanning topics all the way from tooth development to cancer suppression, in this episode we'll just be focusing on the results that came from studying this group of aging and lifespan genes. Of the 9 hallmarks of aging they'd previously reported, the team found alterations in the giant tortoise genomes having to do with 6 of these hallmarks. Here's the highlight reel of their discoveries related to these hallmarks of aging in giant tortoises. Number 1, genomic instability. Genetic damage accumulates over time due to continuous stress and the breakdown of DNA repair machinery. In giant tortoises, the team found changes to a key protein used in the DNA repair process. Higher expressions of this protein, NEAL1, are correlated with longer lifespan in both humans and naked mole rats. So now giant tortoises can join the club. Number 2, telomere attrition. This is a hallmark of aging we explicitly discussed during this month's lesson plan. With aging, the end regions of chromosomes, called telomeres, naturally shorten. In giant tortoises, the team found changes to the binding surfaces of a protein called TRF2 that likely affect the formation and structure of telomeres. Number 3, loss of proteostasis. Proteostasis describes a balanced state of proteins in cells, and this balance declines with age. In Lonesome George, the team found 3 copies of a gene related to proteostasis. Not only that, but this gene has been shown to increase lifespan in fruit flies. This gene was also duplicated in the other giant tortoise species they sequenced, suggesting that maintaining protein balance in cells might be a mechanism for long life in giant tortoises. Number 4, deregulated nutrient sensing. We don't only lose some sense of taste and smell as we get older, but we actually lose functionality of pathways that recognize and respond to changes in nutrients, like glucose or sugar. The team identified modifications in giant tortoise genes involved in glucose metabolism, and these might provide a longevity advantage. Number 5, mitochondrial dysfunction. Dysfunction is typically a bad thing for longevity, and mitochondria are really important, so mitochondrial dysfunction makes sense as a hallmark of aging. When mitochondria in our cells lose function, severe disorders can occur, so keeping these cell pieces in working order is essential to long and healthy life. In tortoises, the research team found several mitochondrial gene mutations that could contribute to longer life, including ones that help with detox and protect from alcohol damage. And no, this didn't evolve as a result of tortoise bingers, but rather from their diet of fermented fruit. Number 6, altered intercellular communications. Cells are in constant communications with one another using several types of signals. During the aging process, factors like inflammation can cause these signals to break down. In the tortoise genomes they studied, the team found molecular evidence for decreased inflammatory responses, as well as changes to intercellular communication that could increase lifespan. Overall, this paper presents possible genes and pathways related to the awesomeness that is giant tortoises, including their development, huge size, and amazingly long lifespans. This research adds new data to our understanding of the interactions between genomes and aging. In the words of the article, a better understanding of the processes that we have studied may help to further elucidate the biology of these species and therefore aid the ongoing efforts to conserve these dwindling lineages. This article was published in a family of highly prestigious journals and also made some science news headlines around the globe. Here are some reasons why I think this study is capturing both scientists and citizens. First of all, it's about Lonesome George. Now, I know I wasn't the only one shedding a tear when this majestic man passed away a few years ago. Lonesome George represented the last member of his species, so with his death we lost not only an individual, but an entire evolutionary lineage. Anything having to do with this tortoise typically finds a way into the mainstream media, and this research paper is no exception. Along these same lines, I think the paper is making the rounds because of something seemingly unrelated to science, and that's the poetry of the whole thing. It might sound bizarre at first, but just listen to this excerpt from the authors. Lonesome George, the last representative of C. abingdonii and a renowned emblem of the plight of endangered species, left a legacy including a story written in his genome whose unveiling has just started. A story written in his genome? I mean, come on, it's just beautiful. And the idea of this single tortoise shedding light on the mysteries of aging is just too delightful to pass over. The last reason I personally think the findings in this paper are capturing scientific and public interest is because, in general, the idea of dying isn't a pleasant one. At the core of the human experience is knowing that we aren't immortal and what that means for the way we live our lives. Any research that gets us closer to living longer inspires something almost cosmic within us. It's why Ponce de Leon spent all those years searching for the fountain of youth, and why Voldemort, nay Tom Riddle, made all of those Horcruxes. As with any piece of new research, there are several areas of improvement that exist in this study for follow-up research. My first issue is with the sample size. Comparative genomic analyses can be unbelievably fruitful in terms of what we learn, but without sequencing many different individuals from many different populations, from many different species, from many different ecosystems, well, it's hard to get the full picture. That said, the researchers mentioned that this is a first step into uncharted territories. It's not that the study is providing an entire treasure map with an X marking the spot, it's just telling us some possible places to start looking for treasure. Another point of contention I have with the paper is the mention of using this information to help conserve giant tortoise populations that are in decline. In my opinion, this application is iffy at best. While understanding longevity can certainly help us predict population trends, we're nowhere close to using this info to edit tortoise genomes and make them immortal. Teenage Mutant Ninja giant tortoises aren't the way forward in terms of conservation. We're most likely going to need to focus on things like habitat conservation and population management instead. Basically, how long a species lives won't help it against the fast-paced changes currently facing life on Earth. To round out the topic of metabolism and aging, my friend Adrian asked me a question about one of his favorite species, moths. In this installment of From A to B, Adrian asked me why moths are so awesome yet die so quickly.
I love moths. I loved them so much. Even before they were memes, I loved moths. For like a good chunk of time, I was just like obsessed with moths. I looked into like being a moth keeper because I was lonely and looking for something to do. No, but I like looked into it, and it turns out that moths, like the really exotic, just beautiful, gorgeous moths, live for like 3 days and then they die. But they're like caterpillars. They're in their larval form for months. Why on earth? It's so stupid.
You were so upset when you learned that too.
I mean, no other animal on earth exists that way. Be in your baby form for 90% of your life and then in your, adult form for 3% of it? That doesn't make any sense to me. Why?
Well, we gotta address a few things to help you get over your heartbreak. Which, first of all, is talking a little bit more about moths specifically.
Yes.
About those life stages. And then secondly, by zooming out a little bit and looking at how this might potentially be adaptive and what other species we see it in. So you mentioned like baby form versus adult form. With moths specifically, they have 4 main life stages. They can be as an egg, they can be as a larva, which is when they are a caterpillar, right? Then they can be in the form called a pupa, which is actually when they're inside the cocoon.
Right.
And then they have the adult form. So when you talk about like baby 90% and then adult, that's not totally fair because they're actually constantly going like across quite a few different life stages, right?
Sure, but I feel like that's kind of semantics.
So
you've got like egg,
yeah,
and then caterpillar form, pupa, and then adult.
So you're just wondering why you would be larval for a longer amount of time than adult form?
Yeah, why wouldn't you be in your, that is your apex form.
According to what?
Dragon Ball Z.
Okay.
And all anime ever. You haven't even seen my final form.
I meant more like according to what factor, like beauty, because then that's you. You're putting that onto them that that's their best form.
They can fly. In what version of any animal anywhere is the ability to fly?
Probably a lot of them, because we'd really suck at it.
Not moths. Moths are great at flying, except when there's electronic lights around.
Oh, that's fair.
Because they use the moon to navigate. I know a lot about moths.
Then you should know that there's something adaptive about staying in a non-adult form. You talk about it being, it's like elite form, but I think that's just because you think they're prettiest then. And then that,
everybody thinks they're prettiest then.
But when they're pretty has nothing to do with them surviving or thriving or growing or reproducing.
But why wouldn't they just have a mouth? Why don't the moths have mouths when they're adults?
Here's the thing, is that passing on genes, doing that thing, there's a lot of arguments to be made very as a reductionist argument, like everything exists to reproduce, whether it's sexually, asexually, whatever, pass on genes and then you can peace out. But how many times an organism reproduces and how spread out that is actually has different words. And so moths, as well as other organisms within their same group, so similar to so butterflies, for example, will do this, and it's called SEMELPARITY, like SEMEL, meaning like once, or you think simultaneous, like that word, like a once, and then parity is typically talking about reproduction. But in species that have that strategy, after reproducing, they die. And that's actually a programmed death cellularly, which is wild, right? It's not dying of senescence, like old age. It is actually a programmed death. So now that you know that, so we have like a larger concept, now I would ask you to think of why would that be advantageous to have a programmed death post-reproduction?
So you're big and you're colorful and you got scent glands all over you, and you're a hot moth to trot, hanging out on a tree branch under the moonlight. It's super romantic, but you're also now super vulnerable to predators, because you're big and you're colorful and you don't blend into a G-darn thing. So all you're really good for is attracting another moth to you, you lay your eggs, and then you die.
So part of that, totally, but the death itself, what does that then free up for the new individuals?
You can't say resources. Is that what you're saying? Resources?
Absolutely. Why else would there be a die-off?
Baby moths would not be competing for food with adult moths. Besides, they're in their adult form, they are just a giant target for birds, bats.
But the fact that they don't even have mouths in that adult form is saying like total like non-use of resources. So okay, let's say it's not resources. Let's say in some situation there's actually plenty. It takes energy to reproduce and to go through metamorphosis and to totally break down into goo inside that cocoon and then like reform, and all the insanity that happens during that transition, like there's only X amount of energy. And so I think that there's also something to be said for just using that energy that's been stored up, that which you have remaining, to just go ahead and do the thing and get out of there. I still think it would have more to do with resources, because otherwise, if it were just a matter of like you didn't have enough energy for it, then you'd have a mouth so that you could keep renewing energy. I think it might have something to do with density dependence. So we see that there's a lot of things that can happen to populations that depend on density. And density gets too high, there's too many individuals in one location, there's issues.
The mayflies in some areas get so bad when they end up mating, and then they all just like fall to the ground a couple hours later. And it can get so thick and so bad that people literally have to sweep that stuff into the street, and then the city has to come off and clean up all the dead mayflies, because it's a 1/4 of an inch thick, just this carpet of dead insects.
So that would be a species, a SEMELPARITE species.
Well,
right?
Okay, so think about this. I've been thinking of moths as these like 1 or 2 little beautiful things, or maybe there's a few dozen in an area, but that's not how moths function. We've all seen moths gathering, at like a gas station in the middle of the night in the summer. I mean, it's just everywhere. So I guess if the big moths were reproducing at that number and didn't die off to make way for the next wave, there would just be way too many.
Yeah, and
even if that sounds like heaven to me, doesn't have to you, it sounds like heaven to me.
Way too many moths. Heaven.
Too many moths.
Yeah, and it doesn't just have to be resources like food. Resources can also be things like water, it can be space, it can be density dependence, things like disease, so having certain densities. So there is some form of advantage that might come from clearing out of the way, making way for the new. Otherwise, I feel like we wouldn't see an adult without a mouth, right? Only alive for a few days. I'm really sorry. Saying it out loud, like, I see your heart breaking.
There's a few animals that I want to meet before I die. I want to meet like a big old like Atlas moth. I want to meet a platypus. I want to meet a North American opossum. I want to meet an armadillo. I'm sad. Let me be sad. Let me lament.
You know, what's even stranger though is thinking about mammals that are SEMELPARIS. There are some smaller
mammals that do that?
Yeah.
Like what?
That's wild, right?
What?
There's like smaller mammals, I think in Australia. So if we see SEMELPARITY in like mammals and fish and insects, you know, clearly there's something, if we see it across several different taxa or groups, that's advantageous. So maybe you just start needing to appreciating caterpillars, and then you can enjoy that life stage.
There's the fuzzy caterpillars.
They're really cool.
I can put them on my lip as a mustache.
Sure could. You have a mustache. Why would you add a mustache?
It's a cooler mustache.
All life on Earth ages in some way or another, and although our metabolisms might be different, having a metabolism and processing energy is common to all living things, making it a fascinating topic. Thanks so much for watching, and if you'd like to keep going on Life on Earth adventures with us here on Nature League, make sure to go to youtube.com/Nature League, subscribe, and share. Hey guys, we now have a Nature League pin on dftba.com. Click on the link in the description below to get yours.